What's up, guys? Derek, moreplates.com. Today we're going to be going over Ronnie Coleman's steroid cycle. Yeah, so this video was recorded by Tom Platz in the 90's, and I don't think a lot of people know about it, to be honest. And he basically, anonymously interviewed a bunch of top pros at the Olympia level and had them go over their performance enhancing compounds that they used and dosages and delving into everything. And them staying anonymous was promised as a part of this. At least most of them did. There's only one of them that agreed to just didn't care about being anonymous. And I'm going to do a video on him too. But, while they are anonymous and have their voices altered to make it so we can't really understand who it is, and when their faces are blurred, it's pretty obvious to make out who's who. And I'm not going to say definitively that it's definitely Ronnie Coleman, but my best guess that it probably is. So I'm going to be reacting to and doing commentary on what perhaps could be Ronnie Coleman's performance enhancing compounds that he used in the dosages, just as it's interesting topic. And going over what the pros really use is obviously something everyone wants to know. So this is a good insight into very likely what you can expect at the Olympia level with guys with top 0.00001% genetics. So let's get into it.
The first question I'd like to ask you would be, what brought you to the steroid table, or the steroid? What prompted you to utilize steroids in the first place for the sport?
First, it's like any other type sport. In order to compete with the best guys in the world, you kind of have to do what it takes to get to the level that they're on. So I figured that in order for me to get on the same level that they're on and be on the same playing ground that they were on, I had to be doing the same thing that they were doing. So that's pretty much how I made my decision to go to the next level.
These are very sensitive issues. I realize that, and please think about them as long as you need to. But I'd like to talk about steroids, of course, as we just mentioned. But what specific steroids have you used, and what do you find most effective, and also dosage?
As far as for me, going back to how I got into it, I didn't know anything about it when I got into the sport. So, I figured out, and see what they were doing, see what he was doing, and try to do the same thing. So the guy that I went to told me some of the things that he was doing, and some of the things that he was doing was primobolan, Winstrol, growth hormone, just regular testosterone, anadrol, and I think as far as that, what he told me, I kind of took it upon myself to go out and get the same thing that he was doing. Like I said, when I told you first, I wanted to be on the same playing ground that they were on. As far as the dosages goes, I kind of got with another guy that knew in depth about, how to take certain dosages.
Endocrinologist, or?
No, it's just another guy that was on, that was able to doing it. I didn't want to go to the top guy and say, hey, tell me exactly what you're doing and how you're doing it and all that kind of stuff. Because it probably, kind of made me feel threatened or something. I didn't want to put him on the spot like that. So I just went to another guy that kind of knew what the top guys were doing. So he just told me, just take primobolan, 3 a week, and
3 cc's or 3 vials?
3 cc's a week. And then he said, as far as anadrol, you might want to take 1 or 2 a day. So I kind of went out and started taking 2.
So that might be 300 milligrams of Primo per week, or 600 maybe. I don't know. It depends on how it's dosed. But this is a good example of how there's no real back then there was no like rhyme or reason or like set out like certain like good protocols. It was just guys taking. This is more or less what these videos get into too. That I've already seen them, but I'm reacting to them again. Is it's basically whatever they could get their hands on is basically what they ran. And that's what it seems like, you know, and there was, if they had access to certain things, then there was some like preference over certain things. But for the most part, it was just like taking gear, whatever they could get. So maybe like 300 Primo per week, 50 Anadrol, 50 milligrams of Anadrol per day or something like that. It sounds like so far.
2 a day. And all of a sudden I kind of noticed that I was getting headaches, so I had to back off and go like 1 a day, because he kind of told me, if you get headaches, you know how to back off. And as far as the...
So he had to drop, depending on what the dose was, maybe if they were 50 milligrams, he was doing 100 milligrams per day, and then he dropped to 50 milligrams, or he dropped from 50 milligrams to 25 milligrams of Anadrol per day. But that's either or, that's where we're at right now.
GH goes, you know, I just went to the same guy.
I want to progress to the GH most definitely, but staying with the steroid discussion, let's like, do you use steroids in the off season and before an event?
I only did for an event, and that was it. I never...
Even right now, just before an event?
Yeah, just even up to this day, the only way I do it is like for an event, because...
How many weeks out?
12. I always started 12 weeks out, which is the same time, you know, I do a diet. I just start that with my diet.
So he claims he cycles off entirely and only blasts 12 weeks out from shows and then is natural until then. Now, granted, these guys competed like year-round in the 90s, so I don't know if that means they're on like all the time, but... And, you know, he could be lying for all we know, but I doubt he's lying, considering he probably thinks this is 100% anonymous, whoever this guy happens to be.
With the GH and, of course, the other steroids that go along with it.
So, if we can classify, you mentioned a lot of different steroids. The androgenic steroids, which are have more secondary male characteristics, and clarifying some of these things just for our viewers, and the anabolic steroids, which were more enhancement at a cellular level and less water retention, and maybe you might think less toxic possibly. But would you use the same kind of steroids prior to an? Oh, you don't take steroids. I'm sorry, you don't take steroids. You just mentioned you don't take steroids in the off season, only 3 months prior. So you would take a mixture of anabolic and androgenic compounds prior to an event.
Exactly.
Okay, 3 months out.
3 months out.
Okay, and those, you mentioned some dosages, of course, of the various testosterones and Anadrol.
Basically, what we were trying to do is trying to get like 1,000 to 1,500 milligrams per week.
So is there a formula then?
Yeah, what we do is combine like Primo, Bolin with like, they call it Testex. It's like 250 milligrams. And then we do Eca, which is another 200 milligrams. And another one is called Heptalite. It's another 250 milligrams. So what we do is like Heptalite 250 and 250 is 500, 2 a week. Testex 3 a week, which is 250, 250, and 250. That's like 750. So we're already up to like 1,000. Primobolan, which is about 100. There's another 300 onto that, so we're close to 1,500 already. And we throw in stuff, you know, like the tablets. We throw in like Primo tabs and like B-ball tabs. So that would pretty much be a cycle that we stay on all the way up to about 8 weeks. No, we do it for like 10 weeks. And like the last 2 weeks, you know, do nothing.
Okay, so the weekly dosage is 1,500 milligrams of combined?
1,500 milligrams combined with GH.
Okay, and the last 2 weeks, no steroids whatsoever?
None whatsoever.
Drop it, there's no descending dosage, just drop it?
Just drop it, drop the cold turkey pretty much. And the GH was the same way. We worked that in like 4 IUs a day.
Okay.
On that, and it was the same way. It was the only one that we took every day.
Okay, so you can already kind of see how guys with top genetic response, they still use, you know, what objectively is high dosages to a normal person, but to a lot of guys who think pros take the pros must be taking 10 times more than everyone else just because they're bigger than everyone else. It's probably more that they have insane genetic response. And then a lot of guys are going to say, oh, well, the gear quality was better back then. It was all pharma grade. It's stupid easy to get good gear now. And if you can't get it, then you're not well connected. And honestly, there's more than enough resources to get gear tested too, to make sure you have high quality stuff. And it's not even getting pharma grade stuff's not super difficult, even if you had to go that route. And, I think that's just a dumb excuse when people say the gear was way better back then. It's like, yeah, well, obviously if you have parabol and amps from France, it's going to be better, like Tren, for example. But I mean, like, Tren is Tren. Like, people can make it in underground labs with high quality too. It's just if you have a crappy lab, you have a crappy lab. But I mean, like, it's not rocket science to get good gear. Not advocating using gear, by the way. I'm just saying I feel like a cop-out a lot of guys do, because it's not hard to get accurately dosed anabolics nowadays, especially testosterone. So, which is, the thing that everyone's like therapeutically prescribed. So that's why it's, easy to get, because you get it from your doctor. So anyways, but besides that, the entire androgen load per week of like 1,500 milligrams plus orals probably puts them at, like, let's just say you're using 20 to, I don't even know, he didn't really say 20 to 30 D-bol per day or 50 mgs of Anadrol or something. Might put you at a total androgen load of like 2 grams per week, which is a lot. But for a guy who's the top bodybuilder in the world, or one of them, is it really that much compared to what some guys are doing that are at a regional level nowadays that are using 2 or 3 times as much? So it just goes to show what kind of genetics, how much it plays into this. 4 IUs of GH too. So let us continue.
And we did it pretty much like that cycle.
And prior to the event, you stopped the GH too?
Stopped the GH, stopped everything.
I see.
And other things we might use for our appetite was Tricana. And we took 2 of those a day, which is another appetite stimulant. Another one we took was can't think of the name of it. It's by SmithKline Beecham. It's another appetite stimulant. I'll think of it probably later on.
Okay, so you have a problem with appetite, really?
Yeah, well, no, we just took it just to keep it going, keep it fast. You stay hungry all the time.
So this would enhance your metabolism?
Yeah, this enhances metabolism. So, you just, everything you ate, it went right through you real quick. Your body digested food. So that way you wouldn't hold hardly any fat.
Okay, so this is like a thyroid preparation?
Yeah, exactly.
I see.
So that kind of kept it burning, kept that metabolism going, so you wouldn't hold any fat in it.
Does that stop the last 2 weeks, though?
That stopped also.
I see.
Everything stopped like the last 2 weeks. I mean, you just stopped the cold turkey and just pretty much just finished your workouts, did a little cardio and stuff like that.
So they cut all the gear 2 weeks out, which is really interesting too.
Okay, now how about insulin? Is that something you utilize also?
No, only time we did that was carb load phase. That was incorporated, like, so you carb depleted for like, it probably be like 600 grams of protein. Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. On Wednesday, we carb back up with insulin. Wednesday and Thursday. Just 2 days.
So the insulin would help?
Before you fill you back out.
I see.
We took in like a...
So you can see even insulin, he's talking about using it in a carb up context in terms of glycogen loading the muscle as opposed to using it all through the off season to build tissue. So kind of interesting to hear that too, because the 90s is known as like the era of insulin abuse. So it's kind of interesting to hear him delve into that.
A ton of sugar and carbohydrates on that way. Probably took in anywhere from, I say, 600 to 700 grams of carbs. We're trying to get to a point where we kind of like overcarb, and we use Friday to come back down off it.
Friday to come back down, what do you mean exactly?
Bring it back down to normalcy. On Friday, I did like 600 a day, like on Wednesday and Thursday, and I went back real low on Friday. So we'll come back down and not overcarb.
I see.
You know, that kind of way.
I see. Okay. I guess the next thing we should discuss, which comes to my mind, would be the use of diuretics.
As far as diuretics go, what we do, starting on Sunday, we take like 100 milligrams of aldactone. We did 100 on Sunday, 100 Monday, 100 on Tuesday, and Wednesday. We did probably about 125, 150 aldactone. Thursday, about 150. Friday, we cut aldactone out and went to aldactazide. It probably went about 75 milligrams.
Now, what's the difference between aldactone and aldactazide?
See, what's interesting is that protocol that he's describing from the 90s, I've still seen nowadays being passed around. Like when I was into bodybuilding hardcore years back, I remember I was given a diuretic protocol by a guy, and it was pretty much identical to what he just said, except it started around like Tuesday of peak week as opposed to like the weekend before, which I feel like is pretty far out to be depleting yourself of water. So it just goes to show that these things are more so passed down the grapevine as opposed to being based on, like scientific reasoning. Like it's just, the guy who's better than you or placing better than you, what's he doing? Oh, he does this? Okay, well, I guess that's what we should do, kind of thing. Like these protocols aren't, anything next level or extraordinary. You've already heard the dosages aren't like obscenely sky high like you would expect. So anyway, let's just continue. But that like aldactone leading into a diuretic protocol is like super standard and like still passed around to this day.
Aldactone was pretty much to get your body used to taking the water out of it. Aldactazone dried you out. It's the harshest diuretic of them all.
Okay.
So we use that to just completely dry out.
And that was at the very end?
That was at Friday.
Friday.
It was real. You had to be real careful with that one. It would get you to the point where you'd like be high if you didn't do it right. I almost screwed up with it one time. Matter of fact, I was up in there.
As far as too many diuretics.
Yeah.
Did we discuss insulin? Did we talk about
Yeah. Only time I did that was just the carb up.
the carb up only?
Yeah, only. That's it.
So you don't think the GH and insulin?
I didn't do the GH and insulin thing together.
I see. That's very interesting.
I didn't think I needed that much size, and I was kind of scared of it too.
Uh-huh.
I didn't want to become like insulin dependent.
Do you think some of the guys experienced that?
That was one of the reasons why I didn't want to do it, because I've heard a lot of stories about some guys had become like that. And I was like, oh no, that's the last thing I need.
Mm-hmm. Well,
so he's basically saying here he didn't use a ton of insulin, he just used it for carb loading because he didn't want to become a type 2 diabetic, at least. That's what I gather from what he's saying.
Precautions and or concerns about health risks.
Oh yeah. But as far as my health goes, I had my blood work done. I have it done every year.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't have any problem with liver, kidney, none of that stuff. I was kind of surprised because, going into it, I thought that the dosages would like screw up my liver and kidney from the stuff that I've heard.
Sure.
But when he told me that, and the year before that, and the year before that, I had it tested, and they were all kind of normal like.
So you approach it pretty much from a systematic point of view, and not that the long duration's not that per year.
No, I don't. I try not to abuse it and get hooked on it where I just have to take it, bring my body up and back down and that kind of stuff. So that's why I just periodically use it just for contests only.
I see.
I've never had to use it in off season.
Uh-huh.
That's a period for my body to get back to normal, basically. I think it's good to like shock the body like that, and when it comes time to take it, then it's something new to your body, so it reacts better. I think. At least that's where it always worked for me. I think everybody's different though.
Is anything ever happened, and of course your identity is disguised here, and nothing, none of the viewers will know who you are, but has anything ever happened that really scared you, or any?
Oh yeah, oh yeah, a couple times. The first time it happened, I was taking diuretics, and I was going from one city to another, and I had missed the airplane, so I was on schedule to like be at the contest the day that I was in the air.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was up in the air, and all of a sudden, I just got real weak. I started sweating real bad, and I was there by myself. I was in a foreign country. Nobody didn't know what was going on, and I thought, I'm finna die in this airplane. And that scared me to death. But the flight attendant just happened to be walking through at the same time that was happening, and she had some food, and I just grabbed it, and it had a lot of salt in it, and I just started eating and drinking, and it kind of brought my body back to where it needed to be, because I stopped sweating, and, you know, the weakness and all that stuff went away. But it's a real scary feeling, especially when you're by yourself, and I was all alone. Nobody was with me. No bodybuilder, nobody spoke English, nothing. So I just knew that this was it. That was one time. It's been another time. The other time, I was drying out, and I was in bed. I've been going to the bathroom for about, say about once every 30 minutes. And I probably just, you know, just took in too many diuretics. Because it's kind of hard to get the exact science down.
So it's sort of
and I was,
thing you have to play by ear almost.
Yeah, play by ear almost. And I was laying in bed, and I was getting ready to get up and go use the bathroom because I was going every 30 minutes. I didn't get any sleep. I was getting ready to get up, and a cramp, the worst cramp ever in my life, hit me in my stomach. And I've never had a cramp there before. Like, oh no, I'm finna die right here. But I had somebody there with me, so I wasn't scared. As soon as I moved to grab that cramp, another cramp hit me in my leg. I'm like, oh no. I'm finna ruin my life because this was a big show. I said, I'm finna ruin my life because I'm not doing this contest. I'm going to the doctor right now. That's the first thing I thought, you know. I didn't want to get on stage and have that happen. Because that was the worst cramp I ever had in my whole entire life. And I said, I'm not doing this show. I'm going to the doctor right now. But I happened to have a friend in the room with me. And he just said, hey, just start eating. And I grabbed a bottle of water and I drank the whole, like half a gallon of water. And it went away. But those are the two scariest moments of my life.
Mostly from diuretics.
Diuretics. So I say diuretics is the most dangerous thing. That's dangerous than the steroids. I've never had any effect from it.
So that's something to note too, is diuretics are something that you're screwing with your electrolyte balance so severely you can cause major, like, instant death if you really screw it up. So while gear progressively over the years is going to exacerbate cardiovascular disease and cause a myriad of issues, things in the short term, diuretics are going to really fuck people up. So be careful with that, because I actually have a friend personally who had a cardiac event. I think he had a minor heart attack as a result of a stupid coach who gave him a bad diuretic protocol. And fortunately, he's fine now, but it scared him so badly and almost killed him that he stopped bodybuilding entirely. And he was like a pro caliber classic physique competitor. So you got to be really careful with that stuff, especially if you don't know exactly what you're doing.
Steroid.
No,
liver, kidney, or nothing.
Now, I understand in the top shows nowadays, it wasn't this way when I was competing, that they test only for steroids. I mean, only for diuretics. Is that the key to the event? How do you get around the test?
They test for diuretics, not all diuretics.
Okay.
If you look at the list of diuretics, there's like maybe 100 diuretics on there. There are probably like maybe 120, 130 diuretics out there, in the world. So,
see, it's so ridiculous. They'll test. I don't know if it was just like a marketing thing to make it seem like they test bodybuilders, to make it seem like it's not such a drug abuse ridden sport, but they tested guys in the 90s for diuretics, but they wouldn't test them for gear or for anything else. It was just diuretic use. And maybe that was potentially it was just to persuade bodybuilders to not do something really dangerous that could put their health in jeopardy in, pre-contest scenario where they're trying to get as dry as possible. But I'm surprised they wouldn't test for aldactone and diazide, because those are, like, in this era, the only diuretics we really know of that guys use are, I think it's hydrochlorothiazide is like one of them. That might even be the active ingredient diazide. I'm not even 100% sure off the top of my head. Aldactone, Lasix, and that's like, those are pretty much the only ones I can name off the top of my head. Dandelion root's an over-the-counter thing that some people use, but if they're testing for 100 diuretics and they don't have like the two main ones that guys use, I don't know if what the point of that was, but interesting to hear nonetheless.
when you look at the list, of course, they're testing for a whole bunch of diuretics, but you gotta look at the ones that they're not testing for, and those are the ones that you can use. So, I don't know if, it's just like with anything else, If you design a test for something, there's always going to be a way around it. It's just like for steroids. If you test it for steroids, there's always going to be some way that you can get around it, because they've done that before too. And the same thing with diuretics.
Now, what you mentioned before, I'm going to step back slightly to where we spoke about, or you spoke about using insulin during the loading up phase, the carbing phase of an event. You ever had any ill experiences or negative experiences with insulin?
Oh yeah, I forgot about that one. Yeah, first time I ever did it, you have to eat like a ton of carbs and a ton of sugars all at one time. And so that's what I did. I ate like cannabis, apple pie filling, about 3 or 4 bananas, a whole bunch of dates and raisins, a whole bunch of oatmeal with a lot of sugar in it. So I did what I was supposed to do. All of a sudden,
hearing him talk about just insulin and blood sugar management in general, is you can tell he's a genetic phenom by the lack of his understanding of this concept, but what he looks like irrespective of that. So interesting.
Like 3 hours later, I'm driving down the street, and all of a sudden I started sweating real bad. And my appetite just started right back up, like I had eaten nothing all day. And I'm like, oh no, here we go again.
Describe the feeling a little bit to us.
Okay, the problem I had with the insulin, I took it like early in the morning, and I took, probably about 500 or 600 grams, about 220 grams of carbs at the same time, and it was supposed to like make up for the insulin that I just put inside my body. I didn't know anything about, a reaction that was going to happen afterwards. And I was riding down the street, all of a sudden I started sweating real bad. I started getting real weak. And it was almost the exact same feeling that I had with the diuretics, except I didn't catch any cramps. I was sweating real bad and I was getting real warm. Just so happened I just happened to have some food in my car with me, and I just started chugging it down real fast. I had rice, some meat, and some bananas and stuff. And after I got that in my system, I got my levels back up to where they need to be, where I can stop sweating and the weakness and the feeling, the weak feeling and all that went away. So that's another thing you got to be careful with the insulin.
Do you find the insulin and then the diuretics being the most sensitive things to utilize?
The most sensitive things are those two things. And not only that, they're the most dangerous. Those are the ones that can kill you quicker than anything, than any kind of steroid out there. The insulin and diuretics.
How much insulin would you take then a day? I think we may have covered
We'll
that.
probably do like, we use one called Humminor, where we take like 15 units twice a day.
This is
And when I did
last
that,
week.
yeah, the last week, like a Wednesday.
30 units for carb loading during peak week, I guess.
And Thursday. And when you did that, like I said, you had to take about 200 grams of carbs and sugars all together. And like I said, sometimes like two hours, if you didn't take any insulin shock that hit you, you had to take in a whole bunch more to get over that, to keep you from going into a coma.
It's scary.
Yeah, real scary.
Well, another question I have for you would be, if you're entering more than one show a year, and I understand you do enter more than one show a year, so this, if you're entering, I don't know, up to 10 shows a year, would you be on steroids then more than just prior to the event? Would it be a lot of multiple events?
Yeah, see, like the season starts in February, late February, early March. What we'll probably do is start like in December and get, you know, those 3 months in there, December, January, and February. The shows probably last, maybe you probably go back to back, maybe 3 shows. You like I say, you always get off like the 2 weeks out from the first show. So you just do it all the way up to that point. And for me, I'd rest for like March until the next 3 months before the next show. So you probably do like two cycles a year, 2 3-month cycles.
2-3 months.
So he's saying he's only on gear for 6 months of the year and the rest of it is natural. So, and of those cycles, they only top out at about 2 grams per week. So if he's telling the truth, which my educated guess is he probably is, I don't think he would. Granted, a lot of guys, when they're using like 3 grams, they'll tell people they're on 1.5, and when people are using 1 gram, they'll say they're on 500 mgs just to make it not seem like they're such abusers. But, you know, I'm just going to take for his word. I think he's probably an honest dude, and he thinks he's anonymous right now, so I think he's probably telling the truth. And it just goes to show what a lot of guys nowadays are doing to themselves and how heavy the abuse is now, in contrast to what this was considered extreme. So keep that in mind.
3-month cycles, that's shows.
Yeah.
If you enter more than 2 shows, would you be on longer duration?
No, because basically you just use what you had in your system now to go on for those other shows, unless they were like 3 or 4 months apart.
I see.
Most of the shows are like, there's one this week, then there's another one next week, and there's another one the week after that. So you use the same stuff from that you took for the last 3 months for all those 3 shows.
Which another question I would have would be: are there problems you've ever experienced with enhanced estrogen levels? In other words, do you have blocking agents you might utilize during the course of your yearly training protocol?
Yeah. When I was coming up, they always told me that Novodex was the best blocking agent out there. And so that's what I took. But we did some studies. I just happened to find a guy that had his own lab and was doing studies on a whole bunch of guys. And we found out that if you took Novodex, it negated the effects of GH. So what we did blood tests, urine tests. And it told us testosterone level, what's it called, GH level, but it's not called GH, it's called
IGF?
IGF level. And we found out that Novodex negated the effects of your IGF level, so Novodex was a no-no. And another thing...
So that's the reason why you don't use SERMs and AIs if you don't need them. Inhibits IGF-1.
Thing that we found out didn't even work. It probably blocked a little estrogen, but it didn't do the job. So they did some more studies. This laboratory did. They came up with another drug that worked. That drug was called Teslac.
How do you spell that? Do you know?
Teslac.
Uh-huh.
I forget what it's used for, but the study that they did were on adolescent kids that had I can't think what they had.
Adolescent children with some kind of an illness, growth
In
problem.
the chest area.
They were
Yeah.
cardiac problems.
No, it was called, they called it gyno.
Okay.
This is what they had.
So it's funny. He's like saying this term like it's foreign, but gyno. That's like perhaps one of the first times it was brought up in public. I don't know, but funny because I'm pretty sure everyone here knows what gyno is, and here we have literally Mr. Olympia trying to figure out what the word is for something you would think he would know off the top of his head. So to me, it's just baffling and crazy how, obviously there was so much limited knowledge. It was all just passed through the grapevine, and there was only a few like credible sources back then that you could even refer to for some information. But genetics trumps all. That's what I'm getting out of this. That's what you guys should get out of this too.
As kids.
Right.
And they used this drug to test on the kids, see how it affected the gyno, and it made the lumps in the chest go down.
I see.
So this is a drug that we found out after all the studies that worked, and the Novadex was pretty much just a myth.
Mm-hmm.
Because number one, it didn't work. Number two, it hated the effects of G8. So I think the best information that I can pass along to up and coming, don't take Novadex.
Okay. How about Clomid?
Clomid works. Clomid, Novadex, Clomid and Teslac. And I think there's one other that I
So Ronnie Coleman doesn't think you should use Novadex. I'm assuming on cycle as opposed to off, but I don't even know if they did PCT back then. So
just can't think of. But the one that I thought that really worked was Novadex, and it didn't. It negated the effects of GH.
Okay. You don't feel that there's any significance to insulin making you hold more body fat? That's not a problem.
I think it's probably going to depend on has a lot probably to do with genetics as far as making you hold a lot of body fat. But for the most part, average bodybuilder, has real good genetics, so it's not going to make him hold that much body fat. Apparently, it works real good on a bodybuilder because it worked real good on me as far as pushing, glycogen in the muscle. So I don't think it makes you. That's why you probably have to use it with GH.
So he's pretty much saying he doesn't think insulin makes you fat. I've done an article on this and a video on this. The number one reason why bodybuilders who use, I think it was like 90% of bodybuilders who use insulin get fat. Well, first off, if you're Ronnie Coleman and you're 300 pounds shredded, you could eat whatever you want and you have so much muscle on your body that it's just going to rip through calories. So your metabolism's so fast it doesn't matter what you use pretty much. But for the average guy, yeah, insulin is going to potentially overspill, like with the way a lot of guys take it, where they just smash like high glycemic carbs with it and eating a stupid high surplus and don't use it, intelligently. Yes, you're going to get fat as hell using insulin if you don't very carefully calculate your use of it.
And it kind of like negates the fat amount that your body would hold.
Negates the fat amount in terms of insulin.
As far as, your body fat percentage, you probably hold.
So he's saying he thinks using GH concurrently with insulin is what mitigates the fat storage effects of it. So yeah, like GH has some lipolysis benefits that go along with it, but the reality is the synergy between GH and insulin has more to do with the IGF-1 pathway and less to do with the GH inherently like ripping the fat off.
A lot more body fat if you didn't take the GH with the insulin.
I see.
Here I am trying to critique Mr. Olympia's cycle. That's funny. Don't listen to me.
Right. And it would probably help. That's why the two work so good together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But if you just took it by itself, it'd probably just make you fat.
Yeah, right.
But if you got the GH working with it, it help lean you out, and it's going to make your whole more lean body.
I sort of agree with that. I would never use insulin by itself unless I was type 2 diabetic or type 1 diabetic and needed it. So something to keep in mind, because I know some guys, they do what they're like, what if I use just insulin with, test or my gear? Is that a good idea? I don't think so. If you're just going to use gear with insulin, I think it's just going to negatively impact your body composition. Not guaranteed, but I think it's a lot harder to I think the synergy comes from insulin with GH as opposed to insulin on its own. So I would be wary about that if that's something you're considering. And I more or less agree with what he's saying here. I just think the mechanism of action is a bit different.
Mm-hmm. I see.
And not too much fat.
How about, I guess there's no particular masking agents you use based upon the fact that there's so many, as you indicated, there's so many different diuretics to select from.
There are no masking agents out as far as I know of.
Mm-hmm.
I've been around for quite a while. I've talked to all the top guys, all the top trainers. And there are no masking agents.
How about compounds like escalene or things that are injected directly into the muscle? Is there anything like that you found to be effective?
So he's talking about things like sight enhancing oil, or like back then acetylene, I think Nolotil were like the two things. Basically inflame the muscle. When you jab it right before a show, it would like volumize it and like blow it up with inflammation, sort of thing. Less widely used now, but back then it was really popular, and it was like an instant way to bring up a lagging body part before a show. But anyway, I'll let him detail.
I've found escalene to be effective for about maybe 4 or 5 hours at the most, and that's about it. They're supposed to have a new one out called pumping poles, and with a lot of fat, and I think that's all they're probably going to do, because I know some friends of mine that took it.
Pump and pose, I'm pretty sure, is just synthol, like first generation synthol, so like MCT oil with alcohol in it, essentially.
It just made them fat. It didn't make your muscles no bigger or nothing. I think it's like this goes along with the myth of Nova days. It's supposed to work all these wonders, but it really, in actuality, doesn't do a whole lot for you.
So do you ever utilize?
It hurts you more than it works for you.
In terms of these injections, directly injecting into the muscle and temporarily increasing the size, you don't follow that regime.
Never followed that one.
Mm-hmm. Is there any concerns? I mean, you talked about a few of the situations you've encountered from diuretics or from insulin that scared you.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any concerns or advice you would give to the up-and-coming guy who looks at the top guys and says, I want to go there?
Yeah, I got some real good advice. If you're going to take diuretics, get with somebody that knows exactly what they're doing. And when you do take it, make sure you always around people that know what's going on. Insulin, the same way. Don't go and read some magazine that says, take this amount to do this. You go with somebody that has experienced it, has trained some people, that has trained people to do it, and that knows exactly how it's going to work. And when you take it, never be alone. If you're alone, make sure you have plenty of food and water with you at all times. All times.
Very interesting. On a yearly basis or an annual basis, whether you enter one show a year or multiple shows, I guess it would vary, but how much money does it cost to get in shape? Roughly, I mean, approximately.
Give you a good estimate. 15,000
15 for like foul for one show.
for one show. One show. That's just for one show. So if you go into a show,
So $15,000 for prep, supposedly. But the majority of that's probably for the growth hormone, because back then it was, you know, pharma grade or nothing, pretty much. And I'm sure the kits back then are formidable prices to what they are now, even with all the inflation from what I've seen. So at least maybe he touches on that here. I forget. I watched this a while ago for the first time, but let's see what he says in terms of how he breaks down that cost.
and the top prize is 10,000, you're gonna lose money.
Minus taxes,
You're gonna lose money. Either way you look at it. You mainly do the smaller shows to build up your status. That's why it's good for them to put the smaller shows back to back, back to back. Because you go, you get first, you're still in the hole.
right?
So if you do the second show and you get first, you'll make some money.
See, I see. It's
It all depends on how well prepared you want to be. So it's like the more well prepared you are, the better you do.
Do you think that the top pros in the sport can make a good living?
Yeah, that's going to all depend on how well you do in contest. If you're not placing in the top 5, you're going to lose in every show you go to. Point blank. You'll never make any money. So if you're not placing in the top 5 in any show, in any pro show, you're losing money.
And times have changed. Damn. Like, if these guys, you could be like a top 50 guy, you could not even be in the running and get rich. And lots of guys do in the fitness industry now, but it sucks. These guys are born like 20 years too soon because they're just crazy, insane physiques, you know, busting their ass to get on stage and look insane, spending all this money to look insane, and then they're basically depending on prize money and like sponsorships, whereas nowadays they could have social media and have their own thing and start their own businesses and such, but back then it sucks to see how limited these guys were. Only top 5 guys were profitable, supposedly.
Every show you go to, unless they start reaching the prize money,
Yep.
which I don't see.
It's too bad. Are the exhibitions and the seminars as prominent as they were in the 80s? I was competing in the 80s, and that's why I'm thinking.
I'll say it like this, they're prominent, but becoming a professional athletes you get out there,
Yeah.
becoming amateur guys you get out there, you're only going to get a small amount because there's so much competition between all the guys. So that'll make up for some of it, but not a whole lot of it.
I see. Are there anything that aren't, that are over-the-counter drugs like andro? Is that something that or have used or think it's effective?
I think the best two over-counter drugs are andro, HMB, and creatine. And of course, vitamin E, vitamin C, and all the regular vitamins like magnesium and all that kind of stuff that your body kind of like needs to operate on a regular basis to want to work. But for the most part, the proteins work good for me. Creatine works good for me. HMB has worked good for me. Andro, all the andro products have worked good for me.
Most of these products you just mentioned, are they used during prior to competitive time or when you're not really competing?
I use product competitive.
So they actually enhance, you think, the effectiveness of the real drugs?
Yeah, I think so. Everybody probably going to have their own opinion because some people don't use them because they think they're going to get, what they need from just the steroid. But I think they work good hand in hand. They've always worked good for me.
Understand. Well, I sincerely appreciate you coming here today
Okay.
and sharing these really rather sensitive subjects matter with our audience, and again, I want to assure you your identity will be totally protected, and no one will know who you are except myself, which will never be told to anyone. Okay, but hopefully, by one thing, by doing this, we can relate to our viewers and to our audience that there are some negative connotations or some precautions you
definitely have to take.
Okay, most definitely. And I don't know how you feel about this, but do you really think that steroids create the essence of a champion?
It's just like with any other, sport. You have to have natural talent, you have to have genetics, and of course, with bodybuilding, steroids just going to make it all that much better. So to be, you have to have it.
Okay, so to compete on a level of a pro level.
You have to have it.
Okay, no, but you don't know any pros that don't use it.
Yeah, you can't. Yeah, probably maybe a couple, but they're not doing top 5 in all the shows. They probably do okay, but once you get to the Olympia level and all the bigger contests, you have to have it. You have to have it to compete. It's just part of the game.
Okay, so what you're saying basically is steroids do work, of course.
Of course.
Are they magic?
They're not magic. You have to train hard. You have to work hard. You have to be dedicated. And you have to do what it takes to be the best. I mean, you can't rely solely on one thing. Can't be one-dimensional. You have to have good genetics. You can't be a top professional without it. You have to work out hard, very hard. You have to be dedicated. You have to adhere to a strict diet. All those things combined makes you a great champion, along with steroids. But you can't have one and not have the other.
Regarding the Teslac and the Clomid and various blocking agents or natural testosterone enhancing agents, is that used in conjunction with the steroids, or is that used when you're off steroids?
Okay, as far as the Teslac goes, that is used in conjunction, and that started the same day that you start your cycle. You can stay on the Teslac as long as you want to, but once your cycle is over with, then you incorporate the other blocking agent, Clomid. I guess because your body is so used to the Teslac and really, build up a tolerance to it, so you want to add something else after the cycle. And Clomid is one to bring your natural testosterone level back up to par, because once you get out of the cycle, it's going to take maybe like 2 to 3 months for your natural testosterone to kick in. Your girlfriend's not going to be happy at all with that. So you use the Clomid, the HCG.
Right. Together?
Together. To kick it back into the cycle. And of course, they have some drugs for the liver also. One is called Legalon, helps bring the liver back up to par. And
in terms of what function? Enzyme.
Yeah, bring the enzyme level back down.
Really?
To a normal level.
This is again done with when you're off of the.
Once you get off. Legalon is one of them, and milk thistle is the natural one that you can use.
Milk thistle, I see.
Yeah. And I think that's basically it.
One question I'd like you to respond to, which is not directly related to certain products or drugs. What are your feelings on granted, this is where the pros are. This is what the pros are doing, and this is why we're here today, to provide this education and this insight. But in terms of how the teenager or the young first-time amateur in terms of bodybuilding views the pros, what is your advice or suggestions, or do you have anything to address in terms of the younger person looking at you guys on stage?
It's the hardest thing in the world to accept as a teenager, that steroids are not going to make you grow like you want to grow. Because when you're young, you want to want to be as big as you possibly can be. And you thinking you want to be as big as you possibly can be, as fast as you possibly can be. And that's where the mistake occurs. You have to, it takes time. Your body doesn't, I think it doesn't start maxing out to you in your late 30s. If you do it right.
And again, I want our viewers to be aware of the fact that we're not recommending or prescribing any of these drugs mentioned or specific dosage patterns. We're not prescribing or recommending any specific dosages or specific drugs. We're merely providing this information and this insight as educational and informative so we can really, for the first time as I see it, address the issues in terms of reality. And I think as we address these issues for the first time in terms of reality, hopefully we can make a difference in terms of some of the abusive procedures that we were speaking about in terms of the teenagers and the younger people looking at the top pros in the world. And maybe even amongst themselves, we can instill a healthier standard of competition, which is important to us all.
Okay, so, you know, in closing, it's that, you know, it's pretty insightful to see what, I'm not going to say 100% definitively that's what he used, but, you know, it pretty much boiled down to about 2 grams of gear a week, 4 IUs of GH, insulin for carb loading pre-contest, and only on gear for 6 months out of 12 months of the year. And that's top of the top tier of elite bodybuilders. So you have guys who are literally cruising on like 500 milligrams of test year round and then blasting with like 5-6 grams to compete at regional shows. So this goes back to my genetics discussion that I always go back to, and I've had in several of my past videos. You know, if you're going to be in this sport, just be aware of the risks. And, you know, the disclaimer that Tom Platz laid out at the end of that thing was, I couldn't say it better myself. Be aware of what you're doing to yourself, and there comes a point where you have to realize pushing it more is just not going to yield. This is coming from me. Pushing it more is not going to yield any additional returns above and beyond a certain point. At that point, you're just playing with fire and pushing your body for no reason. Like if you're pushing a few grams of gear and you're still competing at regional shows and not placing well, like if you're not like planning on dying within the next 10 years, then bodybuilding is probably not for you. You should take a step back and reconsider some things. And, you know, that's basically where I stood. I was, you know, thought I had some aspirations of potentially being a pro, and like one day when I was like 20 years old, I thought, oh, I'm gonna, you know, just blast gear and get to 260 lean and everything's gonna be good. But I just like was so oblivious to what actually occurs from using these hormones, and especially for prolonged periods of time, and what you're gonna do to your body. So I'm not trying to fear monger gear or anything like that. I'm just saying take a step back and realize that the guys at the top probably aren't using 10 times more than you are, like a lot of guys will lead you to believe, because everyone seems to think, oh, they're using some secret compound and that's why they're so huge. Oh, they have Increlex, or oh, they have this, or they have that, or they use 20 grams of this and 500 IUs, and it's probably not the case. They probably use the exact same stuff you do. They just have insane genetics. So just, you know, just a reality check and some good insight into seeing what goes on. And hope you guys enjoyed that video, found it insightful, learned something. Please like, subscribe, comment, check out my blog, moreplatesmoredates.com. Follow me on Instagram at moreplates_moredates, Twitter, Snapchat, Facebook, etc. Check out some of my sponsors in the video description below if you want to support the channel. Thank you guys for watching. Talk to you soon.